Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We begin with a major political development in Burundi, where an army general says he had ousted Pierre Nkurunziza as president on Wednesday for seeking an unconstitutional third term in office. Major General Godefroid Niyombare, who was fired by President Pierre Nkurunziza as intelligence chief in February, made the stunning announcement while speaking at a military barracks to reporters. He later told private radio stations that the president has been dismissed and that he will form a committee to restore national harmony and unity. After his declaration, crowds of people streamed onto the streets of Burundi's capital, cheering and singing as soldiers surrounded the state broadcasting building. Earlier in the day, hundreds of protesters marched in Bujumbura and threw stones at policemen as violent clashes broke out. Police at the scene fired tear gas to disperse them. Police also used water cannon and tear gas to disperse a group of protesters. Mr. Nkurunziza, 51, is currently attending a meeting called by regional leaders in Tanzania. Protest organizers have urged the other African leaders to demand that Nkurunziza's bid for a third term is halted. Protesters are urging the president to remain in Tanzania.
If possible, he should stay there in Tanzania. We don't want him. We are tired of him and the things he has done to us. He thinks of us citizens as a cup of tea he can drink up. But let him try and drink us now.
We will stay on the streets until he lets go of the third term. We would prefer to die in the streets, and after we die, he can then rule over the trees and the buildings.
Nkurunziza, who once led a rebel group from the majority Hutu population against the minority Tutsi-led army in the war, has pointed to a constitutional court ruling that said his first term did not count as he was chosen by lawmakers and not voted in. At least 20 people have been killed since unrest erupted more than 2 weeks ago, according to an unofficial count by activists. More than 50,000 people have fled to neighboring states. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, said the crisis was heading towards a worst-case scenario that could see 300,000 people fleeing, some to other parts of Burundi and others abroad. Well, for the latest on this developing situation, East Africa correspondent Gabe Joselow joins us live by phone from Bujumbura. Gabe, who is in charge in Burundi as we speak right now?
Well, that's the big question we're all trying to figure out at the moment. General Nyambore made his announcement about 3 o'clock local time here, and everybody poured out into the streets celebrating this as a major victory for those who wanted to get rid of President Pierre Nkurunziza. But according to the Burundi presidency, the president is still in charge. There has been no successful coup, and the latest we heard was that the president was returning to Bujumbura this evening and will be trying to retake control of the streets, I suppose, overnight and going into tomorrow.
But we hear that there's someone else has announced that the airspace has been closed down and there's nobody who is allowed to go in or out of the country. Is that true?
We know that the airport has been closed down to regular commercial flights, that's surrounded, though, by military who are apparently supportive of the president. So if he wanted to return, I'm sure he could find a way to do that. But yeah, the city is in a bit of turmoil right now as people try to figure out exactly what's going on. The big question is, of course, whether General Nyambore represents most of the armed forces or a sizable enough faction of the armed forces to actually enforce this coup, or if he just is speaking for himself or for a smaller group.
Now, Gabe, you're there in Burundi. People have been wondering, is this just about the constitutional issue, the third term question, or are there other issues actually fueling this instability?
What people tell us in the streets is that they've been disappointed, of course, with the rule of Pierre Nkurunziza and his political party, which they say are too dominant. That there is too much corruption in the system, that one political party holds all of the jobs and controls too much of the country, and there isn't really a place for the people. So those are the factors that have contributed to the tension here, that have made these protests particularly active. So it's not just about the third term, although that is the number one issue that people bring up when you ask, why are you in the streets? Why are you clashing with police? They really don't want to see this third term for the current leader.
Now, we've been seeing people opposed to a third time on the streets. Have there been any that have come on the streets to support Mr. Nkurunziza?
Well, we haven't seen any protests in support of the president, at least not during my time here in Bujumbura. He does, of course, still enjoy support from the police who are out there confronting the protesters, and then also an armed wing of his ruling party, a youth wing, that have been accused of committing some violent acts and also confronting the anti-Nkurunziza protesters during the last few weeks.
Gabe, thank you very much. East Africa correspondent Gabe Joselow reporting live from Bujumbura. Now, for more insights into the unrest in Burundi, I'm joined now by Elavie Ndura, professor at George Mason University and a native of Burundi. Professor Ndura, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, very disturbing developments in Burundi. So, Professor, did you see this coming?
I did not see it coming this soon, but I knew it would come because people can be held in that kind of limbo without knowing what's going to happen only for so long.
Yes. Now, I did ask our correspondent about what are the other issues.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the issues that Burundians have been dealing with in the last few years?
Well, Burundi has a difficult history, first of all. Any event that occurs sends most Burundians back to the history of conflict, intergroup conflict, of discrimination, of fear, of uncertainty. So I keep wondering myself, because I have collected lots of research data from Burundi after 2005, when I was allowed to go back into the country. The issues are more complex. People had hope that their lives would substantially improve after Nkurunziza took over. In some ways, life did improve a little bit. Peace did return, which people were really hungry for. They were tired of violence. So he brought peace and non-violence to the country for the 10 years. Yeah. But they remained poor.
Yes.
And they remain limited in terms of access to certain services because access to many opportunities in social services became politicized. And that became, I think, part of the problem.
And you know, the last few weeks has seen some of the most violent demonstrations, but it's not lost on our memory that actually we had demonstrations, protests even last year.
Yes.
Now, some of these issues started way before.
Right.
Why do you think this was allowed to get to where it is today?
Well, I think Pierre Nkurunziza and his supporters may have lost control. Yeah, honestly, that's what I think. I was not on the ground to collect immediate data. But I think either they thought the problem would go away on its own, which would have been a naive way of thinking. When people are in uprisings, they don't come down on their own. They thought the elections would happen and the problems would go away, and the threat and you know, outlawing the public demonstrations. They thought people would abide by that law,
which they did not.
Which
now,
they did not.
We know that Burundi is a country that came from conflict. Do you have concerns that actually the same issues might resurface and Burundi could slide back to where it was some 10 years ago?
I do, because my main concern and my main fear, and the fear of many people who follow the events in Burundi very closely, and many people who care about Burundi, is the lack of a political program, a social program, an economic program that could really show the people that their hope is materializing, that they can access social services without having to be politicized, that poverty is being alleviated in some way. The lack of clear vision, national vision, for me is a major concern.
Do you think it will go back to civilian rule soon, hopefully?
I do hope not. Because my research data, the most positive finding from my research data of the past 10 years is that the majority of the people across ethnic lines, across socio-economic lines, are very, very tired of violence.
Let's just hope for the best. Yes. Professor Ndura, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Professor Elavie Ndura is a professor at George Mason University and a Fulbright Senior Specialist roster candidate for Peace Education and Conflict Prevention.